Welcome to Johnsequitur, a show about everything.
Hello, and welcome to Johnsequitur. I'm John, and I'm by myself this week, just like the good old days. Now, before I get into all the nitty-gritty stuff that I have to talk about, just a couple of things I got to throw out here. This week was supposed to be a week where we discussed the coronavirus with an actual ICU nurse, but, you know, the life of nurses and everything. She was called into work last week and couldn't make it, but we will have that episode coming up for you. We also have an upcoming episode where M will be joining the others for the first time. We'll have M, Jay, Lindsay, maybe Liquid Thunder. I'm not sure. We still have to work out all the details on this, but we're going to be talking about some cults. I'm not sure which cults yet, but I know Scientology is one of them, so I guess I better prepare to get sued. So, what are we talking about today? Well, it's almost been 4 years since I started the show. I actually started it on February 4th, 2017, but the idea to do something like this came about in 2016. Now, if you know what today is, you know that's probably not a coincidence, especially if you've actually watched the show going back before it became a podcast. Some stuff happened in 2016. I don't know if you were aware of it, but some stuff happened, and even though since the beginning of the internet, the warning has always been, you can't believe everything you see on the internet, it became blatantly clear in 2016 to me, on a personal level, that people really were believing everything that they saw on the internet. Everything. And it became dangerous. And, well, we know what happened. And it frustrated me quite a bit. And I started getting into philosophy and science and just, I'm like, if people aren't going to be informed, I'm going to teach myself things. Because I don't want to end up like that. I didn't want to end up hearing somebody say these terrible things and think that's fine. I never wanted to be that kind of person. And that's when I stumbled across something called the Nothing Forum, which we're going to continue to talk about a lot in this episode, I think. But at the time when I heard it, I remember them saying something along the lines of, technology, the internet, social media is all untested. Everything that you put on it is a test right now. Nobody really knows what it is for. And that struck a chord with me. And I remember thinking, I want to have conversations like this. So that's when I started coming up with the idea for Johnsequitur. Actually, M has a lot more to do with this show than I do. That's why I've decided, when putting it into podcast form, she was going to be an integral part of it, because this was kind of her idea. It was with discussions that her and I had back and forth at the time, because I was feeling a little unsatisfied with the horror podcast and everything. I love the horror podcast now. I've got this reinvigorated spirit for it, and I just love doing that, and I'm going to keep doing it as long as I can. I've been doing it 8 years. I'm going to do it another 8. That's the most fun that I have, but this format of Johnsequitur that we have now is exactly what I wanted from the beginning. So why did I decide today would be a good day to look back on Johnsequitur a little bit? Well, because it's 2020 and an election just happened. And there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that Donald Trump is an integral reason as to why I decided to make this show. I voted third party in 2016. I was uninformed. I am guilty of thinking that Clinton and Trump were the same, ostensibly. I didn't look at their policies. I'm telling you right now, this election I pored over policy. I read so many bills. I read more bills than I think the Congress and Senate read, because if you ever listen to the Republicans talk about the Green New Deal, they didn't read it. I did. I read both versions of it. And my God, I work for the government, and I can tell you, yeah, that's about right. It's all not, like, it could be streamlined down to, like, these bills could be, like, 10 pages if they really wanted to, but they have to put these mundane, crappy details, and I think they try to stick things in where you might not notice if you aren't reading it or something like that. I hate bureaucracy. I hate our government. I hate the way that they work. So when I later in this episode get into what I feel about the government, don't expect me to heap praise on Joe Biden, because believe me, that's not happening. But let's back up a bit here. After Trump won, I decided it would be a good idea to try and talk to the people who voted for him and see maybe what kind of mindset they were in. I wasn't surprised at first at how good they were at speaking. A lot of what they said I didn't like, but they presented it in a way that could be convincing. And that's when I started talking to people from the Nothing Forum. At first, the Nothing Forum was just kind of some guys talking and just about their lives or whatever, their friendship, their experiences. It became more than that. The actual podcast began a forum on Facebook that ended up becoming gigantic. And I would say I was pretty good friends with the guy who hosted it for a short period of time. We seemed to get along. And then things became a little bit more, I guess the word for it would be racist? Like, really racist? Like, every morning I would wake up and there would be a guy trying to defend racism, and they would be like, it's okay, it's social media, people can say what they want and do what they want on here. And it just got worse and worse and worse. Meanwhile, with Johnsequitur, consecutively, what I was doing was going out. I actually went to a protest that took place in Grove City a year after Trump was elected, when Mike Pence visited the college here. There were protests. And so I went to one and spoke to somebody, and there's a video of it on YouTube. Really, their only concern was that I was videotaping them. So I didn't get a whole lot of information from them. And that wasn't really helpful. So I began to, as again, an uninformed guy who was just venturing out into the world really for the first time, even though I was in my 30s, it was still new for me to be exploring these avenues of meeting new people outside of my bubble, outside of my circle. These people in Nothing Forum had me convinced for a little while that some of these social issues were overblown. And that is partially why there's some episodes on my YouTube account that I will not put in audio form, because I would like them to just kind of fade away into obscurity. One thing's for sure, if I ever run for office, that account is getting deleted, because I completely disagree with a lot of the stances that I was starting to take on there. I don't know exactly when I turned, but I believe it was when the guy who ran the podcast began doxing people and going into their profiles to pull out information about them to hurt them when they would be winning arguments online with him. It was ridiculous. It's just an online discussion. There's no reason to bring personal things into it. And then I started realizing that I've never been this way. This isn't me. This isn't what makes me me. To try and justify things like police brutality. So I just kind of backed out of the group. They started bringing up a guy's addiction background and things like that, and I'd had enough, and I left the group. I stayed friends with a couple of the people on there. I actually visited one last October, I think, but I'm going to get into that in a second too. I visited them last October. They dumped the most horrific story they could on me after I had smoked with them. So I was in a pretty jovial mood. I was in a good mood. And they just dumped this horrific personal thing on me. And I went from laughing to realizing that I had been sitting there smiling while they were telling me this story because I was high. And I was like, oh my God, why are they dumping this on me? They don't know me. As it turned out, this person is not a good person either. And I'm no longer friends with them. I found that out when the George Floyd murder happened. When that happened, I was going through a lot of personal shit. Just my mental state was not good. I had actually been doing some research on kids in cages, and it put me in just a horrible depression that made me stop doing the show completely. Originally, I wanted to do things like that with this show. At some point, I was doing fake makeup tutorials, so I got way off track. But when I pulled it back on the track and did in-depth research on kids in cages, it broke me mentally. And I was no longer willing to accept both sides of these arguments anymore. I couldn't. So when the George Floyd thing happened and people started protesting and buildings were getting burned and businesses were getting burned and people were mad at capitalism and mad at police brutality and mad at the system, I was too. I always have been. I have been since I was a teenager and had the slightest understanding of what the hell the world was. It wasn't a great understanding, but I had an understanding that I was about to leave the enjoyment of my life and put myself in a situation where I was going to be forced to do things I didn't want to do for a third of my life just so I could pay for things I didn't really care to have. Yes, I like food. Yes, I like having a house. But that's it. And the prices are outrageous for these things. And I realized that early on. And I would work so hard at these jobs that people think are so easy. And everybody can, I know a lot of people can attest to this. You work the minimum wage jobs and they are hard as fuck. They are so difficult. More difficult than what I do now. And I make more than double doing what I do now. I have zero stress at my job at all. It's boring and it can get tediously numbing, mind-numbing, but it is nothing like having somebody scream at you like you're a subhuman. And then when you would hope that you could make enough to live on, you can't come close to it. And at times I was working 2 to 3 jobs and just barely getting by. So I hated the system. I let that go for a little bit when I was trying to explore the other side that embraced Trumpism. But the kids in cages was the last straw for me. So when this person that I was still talking to told me how wrong I was to support things like protests, I cut them out of my life. And I started cutting all of these people out of my life one by one. Family members I kept around. Although it really hurt to know that these people that I had looked up to, loved, spent time with, my friends as well. I've cut friends out of my life because of this. I think a lot of people can relate to what I'm saying. There comes a point when you can't look at these people and say, I can justify talking to you, because you're calling for things that hurt people. You're calling for things that fundamentally just destroy people mentally, physically, tear families apart. I can't with that. So this election has happened, and before Joe Biden was even the candidate, Bernie Sanders was running again, and he was winning. And then this happened.
My name's Joe Biden. I'm a Democratic candidate for the United States Senate. Look me over. If you like what you see, help out. If not, vote for the other by.
Now, at that point, that night, I really believed that Joe Biden, for some reason, who was still in the race, even though he was losing everywhere at that point, he was done because he didn't even know where he was or what he was doing. Now, here's the thing. When this started to happen, people began to say that if you had negative things to say about Joe Biden, you were supporting Trump. That's the wrong message to tell people. That is being stuck in a dichotomy, and it's not the right way to be. But when he started doing that, I thought, Bernie's going to run away with this because Bernie's competent. He knows what position he's running for in the government. That alone should be enough. That night, Barack Obama got on the phone with a bunch of the people who were still in the primary and told them to drop out and back Biden. The percentages were not with Biden. The popularity was not with Biden. But the message was going to be, Biden can beat Trump. Bernie can't. Bernie is not electable. Now, there's been many discussions since then about this. But it's really very simple. If you get the most votes and get the most electoral votes, you win, whether or not you're electable. Because I gotta tell you, Trump was not electable in 2016, and he won because people voted for him. It doesn't matter if they're electable. If you vote for them, they win. But everybody was like, oh my God, we have to beat Trump, right? We don't want to support racism, which, okay, fair sentiment. We don't want to support racism. But if you look at the policies that Bernie was pushing, both sides of the political dichotomy favor those policies. Both sides, overwhelmingly. It's not really, when you have somebody like Bernie versus Trump, it's not really about the candidates, it's about what they're presenting. Because of what Bernie was presenting. Take Bernie out of it and leave Biden backed by the DNC, and you have two people who have pretty similar, not completely, but kind of similar policies. Then it becomes, do you support the racist or not? Now, I've always maintained that it would make a lot more sense if we were voting for policies, and only policies, and then we put somebody in the office to carry out the policies that we voted for. We don't have two people with different personalities. We have the policies. That would make more sense. This election, the people who voted for Trump, I believe, still hate the system. I still hate the system, but I cannot get behind Trump. If it were anyone else, specifically Bernie, but anybody else who hated the system, I would be okay with voting for him. And I understand why these people don't like the system. I don't like that they're backing racism and are willing to, for the ones who aren't racist, they're willing to put that aside and allow racism to continue just so that they can stick it to the system. But I believe that the system knew that. They knew that your choice was pick a guy who is the system, Biden, or pick a racist who isn't the system, but he's a racist. So here we are. The system got back in. The racist is out. But a lot of fundamental problems still remain. Racism still exists, for one. 70 million people backed Trump, a lot of them being racist or sexist, or religious nut jobs. And Medicare for All, which I believe 80% of people said they were in favor of, is still nowhere near now. Meaningful climate change initiatives are not in place, although Biden has been leaning a little bit more towards climate work. Just none of the progressive ideas are on the table. And the DNC has immediately, establishment Democrats also, have immediately started blaming progressives for losing seats in the, I believe it's the House, or maybe the Senate. Whichever one they lost seats in, they're blaming progressives for having ideas. Now, I just want to say that the word progressive in my brain means moving forward, correct? So why do we want to be stuck in the mud so much? Yes, it's good that the racist is gone. It's now been a week since that's happened, and I don't really give a fuck about rubbing it in the Trumpist faces anymore. Do I believe that the Trumpists are fundamentally good people? No, not really. But I do appreciate their sentiment of hating the system. because I most definitely do. And I don't know if the other people on Johnsequitur share my sentiment or not. I think we're kind of all over the map politically. I think M is a little bit more, she's a little bit more centrist. She's left centrist, I think. I believe J is more conservative. I am left. Like, I am left. Wait, I am the guy that the Republicans tried to say Biden was. He's not. He's not that at all. I wish he was. He's not. When they got up there and told everybody that Biden was going to stop fracking and Biden was like, no, I'm not, that sucked. It sucked because they're like, he's going to do something good, and Biden goes, nah, I don't think so. I'm not going to do that. You know me. I wouldn't do something that would help people. Now, I know what you're going to say. Well, oil and fracking, those are jobs, right? Well, the earth is going to run out of that stuff someday, and the earth doesn't give a fuck about your pension. Not at all. And when it runs out, you're not going to have a job. You have to figure out a way to transition away from that, which I think is what Biden said he was going to do, but I would have to check on that. So, in conclusion, because I don't want to make this too long of an episode of me just talking, I'm happy that the racist is gone. I'm happy that the people that I associated myself with 4 years ago lost. They aren't going away. They are still going to be angry. Trump is going to fight this kicking and screaming, claiming that these ballots are somehow illegal, even though the same ballots put the Republicans ahead in the House and catching up in the Senate. Like, I don't quite understand what his problem is. Like, I don't understand why he thinks that that's okay, or why he thinks Democrats cheated one thing but not the rest of it, because if they did, they're just terrible cheaters. And one more thing, Nancy Pelosi's a piece of shit. I honestly believe that she knew one positive thing about Trump would have won him this election, and I believe that too. If you watch any person who actually knows what they're talking about, not me, people who do this for a living, they will all tell you any action with the coronavirus, any sign of him taking it seriously, he wins this election by a lot. If he gets the stimulus package passed, he wins. He did not get the stimulus package passed. Someone stopped him. Someone named Nancy Pelosi. Am I mad that he didn't win? No. Am I mad that Pelosi used the stimulus that would help people right now in this terrible time as political leverage? Yeah. I'm a little fucking peeved about that. Maybe put a candidate up that can beat Trump. Then you can give people a stimulus. Anyway, that's enough for me today. You can find the show on Spotify, you can find it on iTunes, and you can find it on YouTube. Bite it!